Hello everyone, my name's Benjamin Yoder with OneControllerPort.com here today talking about Bionic Commando Elite Forces. This is a Game Boy Color title that I believe I read is supposedly supposed to be some sort of sequel to the original Bionic Commando on the Game Boy, which is a different game from the NES Bionic Commando, and I think the arcade Bionic Commando. I'm not super familiar with the Bionic Commando series, to be honest with you. And I don't really know if there's any real connection. This is my first Bionic Commando title that I'm playing, so I can't tell you too much about how it compares there. But it's a really fun game overall, I feel like. It's, you know, as expected on the Game Boy Color, it's kind of like this side-scrolling action platformer kind of thing. And I think in true Bionic Commando fashion, there's no jumping. So you have this bionic arm, you kind of extend out either in front of you, at an angle in front of you, or straight upward. And depending on, you know, what kind of surface you grab and what angle you're gripping at, as well as like how you're moving, and if you like fall off a ledge or something, it will either have you retract into that surface, so you kind of just like pull yourself up into a specific spot, or it will put you into a swing, and then you can kind of like swing back and forth and use that to launch yourself around the map. And that's kind of how you platform in this game, where like you can't jump between platforms, but you can like drop below a platform, grapple it, and then kind of grapple it at an angle to fling yourself from one platform to another. It's kind of a rigid swing. I'm more familiar with like a Umihara Kawase kind of thing, where it's a more dynamic, physics-y based swing. In this game, the angles you're using your swing is very, very rigid, and when you grab onto surfaces, there's no real physics come into play. You just kind of swing at a set angle. But where a lot of the depth comes in and how this swing mechanic works depends on how you release yourself from the actual swinging position. So if you just like press down at a certain point of the jump, you'll just kind of like drop down below where you're currently at. If you hold left or right, they'll kind of launch themselves at the peak of the swing. And then if you press the A button during the swing, you can kind of remove yourself from that swing at any point during that swinging transition, which seems to affect your momentum. And then there's also the ability for you to retract your arm while you're swinging, so you're able to shorten your actual swinging radius, which also affects, you know, your jump angle and things like that. Although it is it is a bit dangerous, because once you've kind of retracted yourself into the wall, you're a bit limited in what your options of what you can do. So like you can drop down and like grab again to start swinging, but you can't just like start swinging from a grab that you're already in. So this can create situations where like if you don't have anything to grab after you retracted onto something, you can be stuck and there's no real way for you to actually save yourself, and you'll either have to drop down and hopefully there's a surface below you, or something else you can grapple on the way down, or you'll just like fall to your death. So it's a little limited in that way. And I think that in some ways that's kind of true to form with Bionic Commando. Like I said earlier, you can't jump in this game, and I think Bionic Commando has kind of thrived as a franchise on that mechanic. But I think in the case of a jump, you have the tools to kind of get yourself out of a situation using your bionic arm, where in the case where you're like stuck against a ceiling tile with no real way to kind of grapple onto something else, you just feel like you basically messed up, you're stuck, and you're either dead or you have to redo the entire section that you're in, depending on where you fall down. Now, it can be a little hard to tell what is an actual death pit or not. The Game Boy Color screen size is very small, and so there's a lot of blind jumps in this game. They do give you some tools into like exploring your environment, so you can hold down on the D-pad or hold up on the D-pad, and it'll scroll the camera up and down so you can look around. But when you're going left to right and things like that, there's not a lot of information the game gives you. Now, they will mark some edges with like a skeleton sign, or skull sign rather, to kind of note that like, hey, if you're going this way and you drop down, you're gonna die. And then also they have some things where like, if you can swing on light fixtures, some of the pixels around the light fixture will be different colors, so you can kind of see like, you know, some of the different colored pixels on the edges of the screen. Not sure how that would show up on an original Game Boy Color, but playing on the Game Boy Player is very, very visible. But the game's just inconsistent in these markings. Sometimes there is a death pit and there's not a skull sign there to let you know. Sometimes there's no visual indicator that there is some grabbable surface when you actually fling yourself off screen, and you just gotta kind of make a blind jump and hope. or sometimes just drop down below somewhere and just hope that it's not just like an instant death pit. So it just leaves a lot of questions when you're navigating this world, and it does make for a lot of frustration until you actually start memorizing the levels. Now, I will say that the levels are very fun and diverse. They have a steady increase in complexity, so, you know, the grapple hook mechanic is more of just something to play with in the initial levels. Sure, they'll ask you to kind of grapple yourself up to different surfaces, but you'll find quickly about halfway through the game that they'll start challenging you to do a bunch of grapples back to back to back, and eventually doing a lot of those grapples over essentially instant death pits, or make you swing onto like moving surfaces, sometimes very small moving surfaces that are like just as wide as your character. So the game actually gets like pretty punishing towards the end, and I would say, you know, this game, if you go look at the long play on YouTube, I think it's only like an hour and a half or 2 hours long, but I had to put a lot of time into this game because I was dying pretty frequently. There's a live system in this game, so if you do run out of lives, you kind of are in this weird purgatory where you're stuck with one life, but you also can go back to a previous save because it's a battery backup Game Boy Color game, so you can kind of keep loading your old save. So I burned through my lives very early on in the game, and then so the rest of the game I was just like holding on to one life the whole way through, and that's kind of how I made it through. So if you're just dying with a life, you know, the checkpoint system is pretty generous, but if you get to the point where you are loading a save all the time, there's really only 2 save points, one before you even enter the level, and then one where it's like in the middle of the level you're in. But it never feels like there's like some sudden spike in difficulty. It all feels like they're challenges that are built up to, and so it does feel like the game is really priming you up to challenge the harder aspects of the game towards the end. Now, one cool thing in this game is that there is the ability to unlock new gear. So at the end of every level, you get some kind of new item. It can be as simple as getting some body armor that increases your defense, but it can also give you different guns with different shot types, as well as weapon modifiers. One thing I didn't mention earlier is you have kind of like a Mega Man charge shot as well, so that kind of comes into play in this game too, where you can hold down the shot button. But there are weapon modifiers that can modify how that charge works, so it can be like a faster charge. There's one thing I think called the rapid shotgun that I particularly like, which just basically makes it so whatever weapon you currently have out shoots 3 bullets at once, and when you have something as powerful as like a flamethrower, it's a very devastating attack on even some of the bosses in the game. On the surface, these boss fights look very similar. They're all humanoids. Also, the levels for these boss fights are, I believe, pretty much identical between all of them. But there's actually a lot of variety in how they move, the type of guns they use, and also how you as the player have to kind of avoid them. They all feel aggressive in their own ways, and you have to keep in mind how they're going to navigate between these different platforms. So I think even though on the surface they look very samey, I found them to be very enjoyable overall. Even though they look almost all identical, just like dudes in suits of armor, basically. Now, there is some actual gameplay variety as well. Some of them I think work better than others. So there's, for example, in some stages you can find sniper segments where essentially you just get a first-person view where you can snipe some enemies on like a tower or something. And essentially it's just like a mini game where if you snipe out 3 enemies, you get like a health refill. And I think it's a fun little thing. It's also very ambitious for the Game Boy Color. I mean, there's games like Golgo 13, I think, on the NES that does something very similar, right? But I think just like thinking about more of a 3D space in some ways is a nice touch to the game, and because it's not like a main focus of the game, it's just kind of like a little bonus tucked away in some corners here and there. I think it's a nice surprise when you do run into these encounters. Now, there is one other kind of element that's like these top-down shooter segments. These trigger when you're traveling between levels in the game, and if you run into like an enemy truck, you kind of have to walk around this world and like shoot enemies and just kind of walk through it. You actually don't even have to really shoot enemies. Towards the end of the game, just kind of walking past everybody. These segments I don't think are very fun. You know, not only do you only have like 8-way directions on the Game Boy, so aiming is a little bit of a pain. But just because there's no real challenge here, you're just gonna get a flood of soldiers. There's some stuff in the environment that kind of gets in your way, and then it's like a tank at the end of the level that generally is not very good at actually shooting you. You can kind of you know, find places where it literally can't hit you and then just sit there and like blow it up that way, or you can just walk right past it and walk right out the level. So I think these little top-down segments really didn't need to exist, but I think I could definitely see how somebody would think that would be exciting, like in a very Super Mario Brothers 3 way, where, you know, you have the Hammer Brothers going around the map. I just think the implementation of this part was not great, but again, you can kind of just walk right past it, and it's not really a big deal. One thing that is worth mentioning that is kind of a big deal is starting these levels and getting into those encounters. If you're playing on a Game Boy Advance, I found about halfway through the game, the title would start to crash pretty frequently. I thought this was the issue with my cart, but after talking to somebody on Twitter about it, and then also doing some research of my own, and then also trying on various devices around my house, it seems to be this is particularly a Game Boy Advance issue. And it doesn't really seem to be that you can just kind of like, you know, get around it sometimes. There seems to be actual places in the game where it will just hard lock no matter what, essentially. So probably around like level 10 or so, you'll load up like a menu screen and all the graphics will be jumbled, or if you go into a level, the screen will just turn white. And thankfully, there's usually a save point right before these types of screens trigger, so, you know, it's very, very rare you're going to lose progress from this. But if you want to actually play through and beat this game, it seems very likely that you'll have to use a Game Boy Color or some way to emulate a Game Boy Color style device. I tried on a Game Boy Player and a Game Boy Advanced, and both of those just had problems. But when I went to the Game Boy Color, everything ran perfectly fine. This is a great looking Game Boy Color game though. Like, when you look at the animation of this game, it's really smooth. The characters are really detailed, maybe a bit too big for their own good when we think about playability, but from how it looks really nice. And I like that the characters are very colorful. I like the new female main character who has this like big purple, you know, Shantae style ponytail kind of thing that kind of swings about while you're playing the game. It's a very nice look, and there's also these like really detailed for the Game Boy Color, cutscene portraits that kind of appear. But unfortunately, the cutscene art, and generally any kind of like detailed art in general, is just very inconsistent. You can see the female lead, and she just looks different in every single drawing of her, and also it does not look good a lot of times. She just kind of looks like this weird blob of a person. There are some cutscenes and stuff through the game, but you know, it's a Game Boy Color game. You're not going to get any real depth here. Basically, whichever character you don't choose is kidnapped, and you know, you got to go save them and then go defeat some big fortress thing that's going to blow up the world or whatever. I really enjoyed this game. You know, like I said, I have not played a Bionic Commando game before, so maybe this is just like a honeymoon period with a Bionic Commando game. And maybe I just need to go play one of those, and immediately I'll love one of those more than this game. But I really enjoyed the grapple mechanics of this game. I thought they were really fun once I learned how to use them, and I think there's a lot of cool variety here with like the different equipable weapons, different items you can equip to modify your weapons and your character in general. But the screen resolution on the Game Boy Color really hurt this game. There's so many blind jumps that you really have to be willing to memorize chunks of these levels in order to get past them, which isn't a really big deal since you are able to kind of load up the previous save point pretty quickly, or if you have lives, you just pop back at the beginning of that room, so you can kind of figure it out from there. But death is not like something you can just kind of brush off in this game. If you die, it's kind of frustrating, and it will make you replay chunks of the level, if not entire levels. Especially the last level. The last level was quite the challenge. I spent like maybe 40 minutes trying to run through it. And sometimes when you're just like, you know, grappling around and there's just an enemy that's floating around on screen, you just kind of accidentally swing right into them, you know, just because you couldn't see them or you didn't know where you were supposed to be grappling after you swung. That stuff's kind of frustrating. And you know, I think a lot of people probably play Game Boy Color games via like a Game Boy Advance or like a Game Boy Advance player. You know, having the ability to have a backlit screen is kind of a big deal. You know, this game's colorful enough though that I think it kind of stands out on a Game Boy Color. But having that limitation on only being able to play on Game Boy Color based hardware, I think is a little difficult. I think it may have come out on 3DS Virtual Console in some regions as well, but yeah. Anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks for coming. OneControllerPort.com is the website. I recently did a video on Super Mario Land for the Game Boy as well, so if you want to see a featured review that I've done, go ahead and check out that Super Mario Land video. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Nintendo Software Technology who worked on this game. So if you like Nintendo Software Technology, I also have some stuff on 1080 Avalanche as well, which they've worked on. So I'll link that too. Thank you so much for coming. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to head to the website, it's onecontrollerport.com. Anyways, I hope you have a great week. Bye!